On a night of heavy rain, the manor trembles in the wind as a sinister plot draws near. A secret kidnapping targets the millionaire heir, but a child senses the unseen danger. She acts without hesitation, hides the boy, and single-handedly confronts the men who storm the house. Unknowingly, she finds herself at the center of a conspiracy, where courage is worth more than any fortune. If this story has caught your interest, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Now let's continue. The rain lashed against the windows of the mansion, and the wind made the linen curtains dance like ghosts in the gloom of the London night. It was one of those summer storms that arrive without warning, heavy with humidity and tension, as if the sky itself sensed that something was about to happen in that Kensington mansion. Beatrice Shaw wiped her hands on her apron as she finished arranging the last books on the library shelf. At 42, she knew every corner of that house like the back of her hand. She had arrived there 3 years ago when life had dealt her one of those hands that only fate knows how to play. A widow with no close family, carrying a 4-year-old girl in her arms, and a resume that consisted of domestic work, she had knocked on the Blackwoods' door in search of an opportunity. Arthur Blackwood was known in London not only for the fortune he had built in the pharmaceutical sector, but also for the seriousness with which he conducted his business and the discretion with which he protected his family. His wife Carla was an elegant woman, always impeccably dressed, who had joined the Blackwood family 2 years before Beatrice. She was his second wife, after he had been widowed young from his first. Their son, Raphael, was only 4 years old when Beatrice arrived, the same age as her daughter Isabella. Beatrice still remembered her first day of work, when Mrs. Blackwood had been very clear about the house rules. Her daughter could stay nearby during her shift, but she had to be discreet, quiet, and never bother young Raphael or interfere with the family routine. It was a strict condition, but a necessary one. Beatrice needed that job as she had never needed anything in her life. Isabella, however, was a different kind of child. From a young age, she showed a keen perception of the people and situations around her. She was observant, careful, and had a gentle way of approaching people that made her beloved by all the staff in the house. Even with the imposed restrictions, she and Raphael ended up developing a natural and spontaneous friendship. They played hide-and-seek in the corridors, invented silent games, and shared that complicity that only children know how to create. During these 3 years, Beatrice had noticed subtle changes in the family dynamics. Arthur, who had always been a vigorous and present man, began to show signs of excessive fatigue. His hands trembled slightly during meals, and she saw him leaning on furniture more often. The doctors spoke of stress, overwork, but something in Beatrice's gaze, trained by years of domestic observation, caught nuances that seemed to escape the professionals. Carla, in turn, had gradually taken on more responsibilities at the company. She left early, came home late, and when she was at home she spent hours on the phone speaking in technical terms that Beatrice didn't fully understand, but that sounded like complex business and important decisions. She was an intelligent woman, no doubt, but there was something in the way she looked at her husband that bothered Beatrice. A calculating, measured look, like someone assessing a constantly changing situation. On that stormy night, as Beatrice finished her chores, Isabella was playing discreetly in the hallway that connected the library to the guest rooms. It was a pastime she had developed, creating small, imaginary adventures in the corners of the mansion, always careful not to be seen by Mrs. Blackwood. The girl was 7 now, and her natural curiosity had sharpened. Even more, she knew every sound of the house, every pattern of movement of the residents and staff. That was why, when she heard unfamiliar footsteps near the back door, her childish instinct triggered an internal alarm. They were not the heavy steps of the gardener, nor the hurried steps of the cook, not even the measured steps of the security guards making their nightly rounds. They were cautious, hesitant steps, like those of people trying not to be heard. Isabella approached the window overlooking the back of the house and saw figures moving near the garage. They were men, she didn't know, dressed in work clothes, carrying equipment. For a moment she thought they might be technicians called for an emergency repair because of the rain. But something in the way they moved, always looking around, always checking if they were being watched, made her feel that chill in her stomach that children feel when they sense danger. It was then that Raphael appeared in the hallway, coming from his room. He was pale, his eyes wide, clearly frightened. He approached Isabella and whispered that he had heard strange voices outside his room and that one of the men had mentioned something about the boy and plans that couldn't go wrong. Isabella felt her heart race. Her 7-year-old mind processed the information with a clarity that surprised her. Those men weren't there for repairs, they were there for Raphael, and whatever their intention was, it wasn't good. Without a second thought, she took Raphael's hand and pulled him toward the pantry. It was a room she knew well, as she occasionally helped her mother organize the supplies. But there was something even her mother didn't know. Isabella had discovered in her exploratory adventures a small disguised door behind the shelves of canned goods. It was a passage that connected the pantry to a small storage room attached to the laundry, probably built in the house's early days as a service access. Quickly, she moved some cans aside and opened the small door. The space was tight, but large enough for 2 children. Raphael hesitated for a moment, but the sound of approaching footsteps in the main hallway made him follow Isabella without question. Outside, the men had managed to disable part of the external camera system. They had used the storm as natural cover and introduced themselves to the gatekeeper as emergency electricians, called by the lady of the house to check for possible problems with the power supply. It was a well-elaborated plan, based on months of observing the family's routine and the security's most vulnerable moments. The leader of the group, a man named Marcus, had been hired by people who preferred to remain anonymous, but who had a very specific interest in forcing Arthur Blackwood to make certain business decisions. The plan did not involve physical violence, but rather the creation of a situation of extreme psychological pressure that would lead the businessman to accept a partnership proposal he had been refusing for months. The idea was simple: create a scenario where Raphael disappeared for a few hours, long enough for Arthur, in desperation, to sign the documents that would transfer a significant portion of the company's shareholding control. Afterward, the boy would be found lost somewhere nearby, apparently confused but unharmed, and life would go on as normal. It was a plan that exploited paternal love as a weapon of blackmail, without leaving traces that could be easily tracked. Meanwhile, in the small hiding place behind the pantry, Isabella kept Raphael protected in her arms. She had managed to pull some old towels that were stored there and cover them both to keep them more comfortable and warm. Raphael was trembling, not just from fear, but also from the cold, and Isabella whispered words of reassurance, promising that everything would be all right. From outside, they could hear the men's footsteps moving through the house. They heard doors being opened, drawers being searched, and voices speaking in low but urgent tones. It was clear they were looking for Raphael, and that they were becoming increasingly frustrated by his absence. Beatrice, who had finished organizing the library and was heading to the kitchen to get Isabella, found the unusual silence of the house strange. Normally, even on the quietest nights, there were always small, familiar noises: the ticking of the clocks, the low hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of the television in the living room. But on that night there was something different in the air, a tension she couldn't identify. It was then she noticed that the back door, which was always locked after 8 o'clock, was ajar. Her heart skipped a beat. Beatrice had worked in family homes long enough to know that an open door at night was never a good sign. Immediately her thoughts turned to Isabella. Where was her daughter? She began to look for her in the usual places, whispering her name softly so as not to alarm anyone. But Isabella was not in the hallway, nor on the small bench near the stairs where she used to read, nor in the pantry where she sometimes helped with small tasks. Beatrice's heart beat faster and faster, and a sense of panic began to build in her chest. It was then that she heard male voices coming from the upper floor, voices she didn't recognize. Beatrice went up the stairs with careful steps, trying to understand what was happening. Reaching the bedroom corridor, she saw 2 men coming out of Raphael's room, clearly frustrated. "The boy's not here," one of them said in an irritated tone. "He could be in the game room or the library. We need to find him soon. Time is running out, and Carla won't be able to maintain the distraction much longer." Beatrice felt a shiver run down her spine. Carla. Her employer was involved with these men, and why were they specifically looking for Raphael? Her mind worked quickly, trying to connect information that until then had seemed disjointed. Carla's constant phone calls, her frequent absences from the company, Arthur's increasingly frail health. Instinctively, Beatrice hid behind the guest room door and continued to watch. She saw the men communicating through small radios, coordinating the search for Raphael. It was an organized, professional, and clearly premeditated operation. At that moment, her only priority was to find Isabella and ensure her daughter was safe. She went down the stairs silently and headed back to the pantry, this time paying attention to every detail. It was then she noticed that some cans had been moved. It wasn't something an inattentive person would notice, but Beatrice knew every shelf in that house as she knew the lines on her own hands. She approached the shelf and noticed the small door slightly ajar. Her heart almost stopped when she heard a soft whisper coming from inside the hiding place. "Mum," came Isabella's whispered voice. "I'm here, my love," Beatrice replied softly, carefully opening the small door. "Are you both all right?" The sight she found moved her deeply. Isabella was hugging Raphael, protecting him with her own small body, both wrapped in the old towels. The girl's eyes shone with a mixture of fear and determination that touched Beatrice's heart. "Mum, there are bad men looking for Raphael," Isabella whispered. "They want to take him away. I heard them talking." Beatrice looked at Raphael, who was clearly traumatized but completely trusting Isabella to protect him. Her 7-year-old daughter's courage, placing herself between the danger and the boy, made her feel a mixture of pride and terror. "You did the right thing," Beatrice whispered, "but now we need to get out of here and alert security." It was at that moment they realized the men's footsteps were approaching the pantry. Beatrice made a quick decision. She closed the small door and quickly rearranged the cans, then positioned herself in front of the shelf, pretending to be organizing supplies. When the two men entered the pantry, they found only Beatrice working quietly. "Excuse me, ma'am," one of them said in a falsely polite tone. "We're from the electric company, here to check for a possible system overload. Have you seen where the boy of the house is? His parents are worried and want him nearby during our check." Beatrice, even with her heart racing, remained calm. She knew her answer could determine the safety of Raphael and Isabella. "Young Raphael? I believe he's with his mother in the living room watching television. That's where he usually is after dinner," she lied naturally, pointing to the opposite side of the house. The men looked at each other and hurried off toward the living room. Beatrice waited a few seconds and then opened the small door again. "Now we're getting out of here," she whispered. "You're coming with me to Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood's room. I need to speak to your father, Raphael." But when they reached the master bedroom, they discovered that Arthur was not at home. Carla had told the staff he had to leave for an emergency meeting at the company, but Beatrice was beginning to suspect that this too was part of the plan. The situation was getting complicated, and she needed to take action. She went to the house phone and called the head of security, reporting the presence of strange men on the property. Within minutes, security arrived at the mansion, but the men had already disappeared, leaving only a few signs of their presence. Open doors, rummaged drawers, and part of the electrical system sabotaged as a distraction. When Arthur finally returned home, it was past midnight. Carla had convinced him to leave for a supposed urgent meeting with foreign investors, which ended up being cancelled at the last minute. He arrived tired, confused, and was greeted with the report of what had happened. Beatrice told him everything she had witnessed, but was careful to omit her suspicion about Carla's involvement. It was too serious an accusation to make without concrete proof. Raphael, still shaken, confirmed the details of the account, and Arthur was deeply disturbed to realize that his son had been the target of an attempted kidnapping. But what impressed Arthur most was discovering how Isabella had protected Raphael. The girl's courage, putting herself at risk to ensure his son's safety, deeply touched the businessman's heart. He looked at that 7-year-old child, the daughter of his employee, and saw in her a loyalty and bravery that few adults would show in a similar situation. In the early hours of that morning, as the storm finally passed and the first light of dawn began to brighten the London horizon, Arthur made a decision that would forever change the destiny of the Blackwood family and the Shaw family. Isabella had saved his son, and he would never forget it. The 3 days that followed that stormy night brought changes Beatrice had never imagined possible. Arthur Blackwood, still visibly shaken by what had happened, made decisions that surprised everyone in the house, especially Carla, who tried to hide her annoyance behind forced smiles and seemingly understanding comments. The morning after the incident, Arthur had called Beatrice to his private study. It was the first time she had entered that reserved space, decorated with fine wood, furniture and shelves full of books on economics and management. The businessman, sitting behind his desk, looked older than his 55 years, with deep dark circles under his eyes and his hands trembling slightly as he held a cup of coffee. "Beatrice," he had said in a tired but firm voice, "your daughter saved my son. That is not something one forgets or repays with a simple thank you." He paused, looking out the window at the garden where Raphael and Isabella were playing discreetly. "I want you and Isabella to live here in the main wing of the house. Isabella will have her own room, a private education, and you will be promoted to the family's personal household manager." Beatrice had felt a mixture of gratitude and concern. She knew that this generosity, however deserved, could bring complications. Carla already showed signs of irritation with Isabella's more constant presence in the family areas, and such a drastic change would certainly generate resistance. "Mr. Blackwood," she had replied carefully, "I am very grateful for the offer, but I don't want to cause any trouble for the family. Mrs. Blackwood may not be comfortable with—" "Carla will get used to it." Arthur interrupted in a tone that allowed no argument. "This is my house and my decision. Isabella has proven she has a courage and loyalty that many adults do not possess. She deserves to be treated as part of this family." And so it had happened. Within 48 hours, Isabella had her own room on the second floor, next to Raphael's, decorated with new furniture and toys she had never dreamed of owning. Beatrice took on broader responsibilities, overseeing the entire domestic staff and having access to areas of the house that were previously off-limits to her. But the change that impressed Beatrice the most was the transformation in her own daughter. Isabella, who had always been an observant and careful child, now demonstrated a maturity beyond her 7 years. She had understood with that childish intuition that is sometimes more accurate than adult reason, that she was at the center of something much bigger than a simple kidnapping attempt. Raphael, for his part, had developed an emotional dependence on Isabella that both touched and worried Beatrice. The boy followed her through the corridors, asked to sleep at her bedroom door when he had nightmares, and whispered confidences that revealed a deep fear that those men would come back for him. It was as if, at 7 years old, he already understood that his life was not like that of other children, and that there were dangers he could not fully comprehend. It was during one of these conversations between the children that Beatrice discovered something that left her deeply uneasy. She overheard Raphael telling Isabella about a golden locket his father had given him a few days before the kidnapping attempt. According to the boy, Arthur had been very clear. The locket was to be kept an absolute secret, even from Carla, and it contained a small key that would one day be very important. Beatrice felt a shiver run down her spine. Why would Arthur give his son something like that and ask him to keep it secret from his own wife? And why had it happened just before the kidnapping attempt? The pieces of a complex puzzle began to form in her mind, and they all pointed in a direction she preferred not to consider. Carla, during these first few days after the change, maintained a facade of cordiality, but Beatrice noticed the cold glances directed at Isabella, the seemingly innocent comments about the importance of maintaining family traditions and not confusing social roles. There was a constant tension in the air, as if the house were balanced on a tightrope that could snap at any moment. The situation became even more complicated when Arthur began to show more frequent episodes of mental confusion and physical weakness. Beatrice saw him leaning on the walls of the corridors, forgetting the names of staff he had known for years, and having difficulty concentrating during simple conversations. The doctors spoke of post-traumatic stress related to the incident with Raphael, but Beatrice, with her experience in caring for people, suspected something deeper was going on. One morning, while organizing Arthur's study, she found torn pieces of a document in the trash that mentioned transfer of administrative powers and temporary incapacity for management. The words were fragmented, but they were enough for her to understand that someone was preparing documents to take control of the company if Arthur were declared incapacitated. That afternoon, while the children played in the garden, Beatrice decided to do something she had never done before in her career as a domestic worker: investigate. She took advantage of a moment when Carla had left for one of her frequent meetings at the company and went to the master bedroom. She didn't know exactly what she was looking for, but her intuition told her there were answers there to the questions that tormented her. What she found left her deeply disturbed. On Carla's nightstand, hidden behind a family photo, was a small vial with labels that appeared to have been tampered with. The medication was identified as a vitamin supplement, but there were traces of glue and overlapping paper that suggested the original label had been replaced. Beatrice photographed the vial with her old mobile phone and saved the image. She didn't yet know what to do with that information, but her gut told her she was dealing with something very serious. She rearranged everything exactly as she had found it and left the room, but her heart was pounding. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, she decided to talk to Isabella. She knew her daughter had developed a keen perception of the family dynamics, and she needed to understand what else she had noticed. "My dear," Beatrice said as she tucked the blankets in Isabella's, "a new room. Have you noticed anything different in the house? Something that makes you worried?" Isabella was silent for a few moments, with that thoughtful expression that was characteristic of her when processing important information. "Mum," she said finally, "Aunt Carla doesn't like me here. I can see it in her eyes. And she gives Uncle Arthur medicine every morning, with his coffee. But when he's not looking, she makes a strange face, like she's doing something she shouldn't be." Beatrice felt a lump form in her throat. Her daughter had noticed exactly what she herself had begun to suspect. "And Raphael," Isabella continued, "he told me that sometimes he hears Aunt Carla talking on the phone in a different language, late at night. He doesn't understand what she's saying, but he gets scared because she sounds angry." Beatrice's suspicions were being confirmed in a frightening way. Carla was involved in something much more complex than she had initially imagined. But how could a simple household manager confront her employer's wife with such serious accusations? The answer came from where she least expected it. 2 days later, while serving breakfast, she overheard a phone conversation between Arthur and someone who seemed to be a company lawyer. Arthur was talking about his concerns with important decisions being made without his knowledge, and mentioned the need to review all contracts signed in recent months. After hanging up the phone, Arthur sat for long minutes, his head in his hands. Beatrice, in a moment of courage that surprised her, approached him. "Mr. Blackwood," she said in a firm but respectful voice, "may I speak with you in private?" Arthur looked up, and for the first time, Beatrice saw in his eyes not just weariness but also a lucidity that had been absent in recent weeks. "Of course, Beatrice, what's on your mind?" "Sir, I know this may sound crazy coming from me, but I have been observing things in the house that make me very uneasy. Things related to the medication you take, Mrs. Blackwood's phone calls, and even the kidnapping attempt on Raphael." Arthur looked at her with growing attention. "Go on." Beatrice took a deep breath and told him everything. The vial with the tampered labels, the conversations in a foreign language, the torn documents about the transfer of power, and Isabella's observations about Carla's behavior. When she finished, there were tears in her eyes, but also a steely determination. Arthur was silent for long minutes, processing the information. When he finally spoke, his voice was firm, firmer than Beatrice had heard it in weeks. "Beatrice," he said, "you may not realize it, but you have just confirmed suspicions I have been developing for some time. My mind has been clouded, but my heart never doubted that something was wrong. You and Isabella may have saved not only Raphael, but our entire family." At that moment, an unlikely but powerful alliance was formed between the billionaire businessman and the humble household manager. Both were united by the need to protect the children they loved and to uncover the truth about the events that had been shaking the Blackwood family. Arthur asked Beatrice to continue observing Carla discreetly while he would begin to investigate his wife's business activities. It was a risky plan, but a necessary one. The truth had to be discovered before it was too late. That night, as she watched Isabella and Raphael sleeping peacefully, Beatrice knew that their lives had changed forever. They were no longer just employee and employer, but conspirators united by a common purpose: to protect the children and discover what dark forces threatened the Blackwood family. The golden locket that Raphael kept secret was gaining more importance each day, and Beatrice was sure that it would be the key to unraveling the mystery surrounding the family she had sworn to protect. Isabella's courage had been only the first step on a journey that promised to be far more dangerous and complex than any of them could imagine. The discreet investigation that Arthur and Beatrice had initiated began to reveal disturbing information within the first few days. Arthur, taking advantage of moments of greater mental clarity, managed to access company records that he normally delegated to Carla to manage. What he discovered left him deeply shaken. In the last 6 months, a series of contracts had been signed in his name, but he had no memory of authorizing most of them. They were agreements with international suppliers, modifications to drug formulas, and changes to security processes that seemed to benefit specific foreign companies. Even more disturbing was the fact that his signature on these documents did not look entirely natural, as if it had been made in moments of mental confusion or under the influence of something that compromised his motor coordination. Beatrice, for her part, intensified her observation of Carla's habits. She noticed that her employer kept very specific schedules for certain activities. Every morning, at precisely 6:30, she personally prepared Arthur's coffee, always insisting that he take certain vitamins which, according to her, had been prescribed by his private doctor. But when Beatrice discreetly checked with Dr. Henry Campbell, the family doctor for over 10 years, she discovered that he had never prescribed those specific supplements. It was on a Thursday morning that Beatrice made a discovery that would completely change the course of her suspicions. Carla had left early for a meeting at the company, and Arthur was sleeping in late, enjoying a day without urgent commitments. Beatrice decided to examine Carla's private office more carefully, a small room on the first floor that her employer always kept locked. Using one of the master keys she had as the household manager, she gained access to the room. What she found there left her speechless. The walls were covered with documents, charts, and photos that seemed to be part of a detailed dossier on the Blackwood family and the pharmaceutical company. There was information about Arthur's health dating back long before Carla had officially met him, detailed financial records of the company, and even photos of Raphael at different ages. But what shocked her most was finding, in a locked drawer that she managed to open with difficulty, documents in the name of Dr. Carmen Rodriguez Vega, with a photograph of Carla, but identifying her as a former employee of a rival pharmaceutical company, dismissed for violation of ethical codes and possible industrial espionage. Beatrice discreetly photographed everything she could with her phone, but her hands were shaking so much that some images were blurry. It was clear that Carla was not who she claimed to be. Her approach to Arthur had been calculated, planned, and was part of a much larger scheme than she had imagined. When she rearranged everything and left the office, she found Isabella in the hallway, obviously worried. "Mum, where were you? I looked all over the house," the girl said with that seriousness that characterized her. "I was just checking on a few things, my dear. Everything's fine," Beatrice replied, trying to hide her agitation. "Mum?" Isabella came closer and spoke very softly. "Raphael showed me the locket his father gave him. There's a tiny key inside, and Raphael said his father told him it's to open something very important if something bad happens to him." Beatrice's heart raced. "Where is this locket now, Isabella?" "Raphael hides it under his mattress in the corner of the bed. He's very afraid Aunt Carla will find out. He said his father told him not to tell anyone, but he trusted me." At that moment, Beatrice understood that the children had involuntarily become part of something very dangerous. The locket and the key Raphael was guarding were likely the only way to access information that could definitively unmask Carla. But it also meant that the boy was in constant danger. In the afternoon, when Arthur returned from the company, Beatrice requested an urgent conversation. She showed him the photographs she had taken from Carla's office and watched the businessman's face grow paler as he understood the magnitude of the betrayal. Carmen Rodriguez Vega, Arthur murmured, recognizing the name. She worked for Hemisphere Laboratories, our main competitor, until 2 years ago. There was a scandal about proprietary formulas being leaked, but we could never prove who was involved. Mr. Blackwood, Beatrice said in a firm voice, your wife is not who she says she is, and from what I saw in that office, she has been planning something against your family and your company for years. Arthur was silent for long minutes, digesting the information. When he spoke, his voice was filled with a deep sadness but also a determination that Beatrice hadn't seen in weeks. Beatrice, Raphael told me about the locket. I knew this day would come, but I hoped I would have more time. He went to a small bronze sculpture on his desk and, touching a specific part, opened a secret compartment. From inside, he took out a folder of documents. Over the last few months, when I realized my mind was becoming confused, I started recording conversations and documenting everything that seemed suspicious. This is the evidence I've gathered. Beatrice looked at the folder with reverence. There was the confirmation of everything they had discovered, and probably much more. The key that Raphael is guarding, Arthur continued, opens a safe at the company headquarters where copies of all these documents are kept, along with recordings of Carla's phone conversations that I managed to intercept. But we needed proof of her true identity for it all to make sense. At that moment, they heard the sound of the front door opening. Carla had arrived earlier than expected. Quickly, Arthur put the folder back in the secret compartment, and Beatrice left the study, pretending to be busy with routine household chores. Carla entered the house with a more tense expression than usual. During dinner, Beatrice noticed that she watched Arthur more closely, as if assessing his mental and physical state. She also noticed that Carla made a point of personally preparing her husband's nightly tea, adding a pill. That, she said, was a new medication the doctor had recommended. Arthur, however, took advantage of a moment of Carla's distraction to discreetly discard the pill in the potted plant near the table. It was a small victory, but it meant he was regaining control over his own life. That night, after everyone had gone to sleep, Beatrice decided to do something she had never considered before: confront Carla directly. Not with explicit accusations, but with questions that might reveal inconsistencies in her story. She took advantage of a moment when she found Carla alone in the kitchen, preparing something in the microwave. "Mrs. Blackwood," Beatrice began in a casual tone, "may I ask you a question? It's about Mr. Blackwood." Carla turned with a slightly irritated expression at being interrupted. "What is it, Beatrice?" "It's just that I've noticed he's been very confused lately, forgetting simple things. Do you know if this has anything to do with his work at the company? Perhaps a specific project that has stressed him out?" Beatrice carefully observed Carla's reaction. For a split second, she saw something that looked like satisfaction in her employer's eyes, before she recomposed her worried expression. "Yes, it has been a very difficult time for Arthur. There are complex issues at the company that require important decisions. Fortunately, I have been able to help him manage these situations." "I see," Beatrice continued. "It must be comforting for him to have someone with experience in the pharmaceutical sector to support him. Had you worked in the field before you were married?" Carla immediately tensed. It was a seemingly innocent question, but one that directly touched upon the lie about her identity. I had some minor experiences, nothing very relevant. My background is more focused on general administration," she replied, averting her gaze. "Oh, I see. It's just that I sometimes hear you talking on the phone about very technical matters, with terms that sound very specialized. I thought perhaps you had specific training in the area." Carla's discomfort was now evident. She quickly finished what she was doing in the microwave and moved to leave the kitchen. "Beatrice, those are conversations related to Arthur's business. I need to be informed to be able to help him properly." Her voice was colder and more authoritarian. "And I suggest you focus on your domestic responsibilities, instead of paying attention to private conversations." When Carla left, Beatrice knew she had hit a raw nerve. The defensive reaction and the attempt at intimidation confirmed that her suspicions were correct. Upstairs, Isabella and Raphael had developed their own form of childish investigation. Raphael had shown Isabella how to open the locket, revealing a tiny, delicately crafted key that looked like it would open some kind of special lock. The children had started searching the house for a lock that matched the key, turning the search into a sort of secret game that kept them united and occupied. It was during one of these explorations that they made an important discovery. In Arthur's study, behind a painting depicting the first Blackwood family pharmacy, there was a small safe built into the wall. The lock was so small and discreet that it went unnoticed, but it was exactly the size of the key from the locket. "Isabella," Raphael whispered with excitement, "I think we found it. Dad must have kept something very important in here." But Isabella, with her characteristic prudence, held her friend's arm. "Raphael, we can't open it now. What if your mother shows up? What if it's something that puts us in more danger? We need to tell your nanny and my mum first." The 7-year-old's wisdom impressed Raphael, who agreed to wait for the right moment to reveal their discovery to the adults they trusted. Meanwhile, Carla intensified her suspicious activities. Beatrice saw her making phone calls at odd hours, always in a low voice and in a language that mixed English with what sounded like Spanish. She also noticed that Carla had started leaving the house during the early hours of the morning, returning before dawn, always with excuses about emergencies at the company or problems that required her immediate attention. One of these nocturnal outings coincided with a terrible crisis of mental confusion for Arthur. He woke up disoriented, unable to remember where he was, calling out for people Beatrice didn't know, and showing an alarming physical fragility. Beatrice stayed with him until the crisis passed, offering water and words of comfort, but she knew this was not natural. When Carla returned around 5 in the morning, she found Beatrice still looking after Arthur in the living room. "What happened?" Carla asked, but Beatrice noticed that her concern seemed more related to being discovered out of the house than to her husband's condition. "Mr. Blackwood had a crisis of mental confusion during the night. I thought it best to stay with him until it passed," Beatrice explained. Carla approached her husband, who was now calmer, and immediately began talking about the need to increase the dosage of his medication and seek a more experienced specialist. Beatrice realized that each of Arthur's crises was used by Carla as a justification to intensify what she was now sure was a process of gradual poisoning. The next morning, Beatrice told Arthur everything, including the children's discovery of the secret safe in the study. The businessman was visibly moved to learn that Raphael and Isabella had found the place where he had stored the most important evidence against Carla. "Beatrice," he said in a weak but determined voice, "I need you to understand that my time may be running out. The medications Carla has been giving me are affecting not only my mind, but also my heart. I feel I don't have much time before she manages to completely incapacitate me." Beatrice felt a wave of panic, but Arthur continued, "Therefore tonight, when she is asleep, we will open that safe. Raphael needs to use his key, and you need to see everything that is stored inside. If something happens to me, you will be the only person who knows the whole truth." That afternoon, while the children played in the garden under Beatrice's discreet supervision, Arthur made a decision that would definitively change the course of events. Pretending to take Carla's medication, but actually discarding it whenever possible, he began to gradually regain his mental clarity. It was an immense risk, as Carla would soon notice the improvement and might intensify her malicious efforts, but it was the only way to gather the strength needed to confront her definitively. This night would be decisive. Arthur, Beatrice, Raphael, and Isabella would unite to open the secret safe and uncover all the evidence that could unmask Carla and save not only the Blackwood Company, but Arthur's own life and the safety of the children. But what none of them knew was that Carla had also noticed the subtle changes in everyone's behavior in the house and was preparing her own plan to accelerate her final goals. The battle between truth and lies, between loyalty and betrayal, was about to reach its climax, and the children who had started this journey as victims now became the key pieces for the salvation of the entire Blackwood family. The night had fallen with an unusual quiet over the Blackwood mansion. Carla had retired to her room early, claiming a severe headache, but Beatrice had noticed she stayed awake late, making whispered calls that lasted until almost 2 in the morning. Now, finally, silence had taken over the house. and it was the moment they had all been waiting for with a mixture of anxiety and determination. Arthur, who had managed to stay more lucid throughout the day by completely avoiding Carla's medications, was waiting in the study with Beatrice. The children, despite the late hour, were alert and focused, understanding the importance of the moment with a seriousness that went far beyond their 7 years. "Raphael," Arthur said in a low but emotional voice, "it's time to use the key I gave you. Do you remember what I said about it being very important?" The boy nodded solemnly, taking the golden locket from under his shirt. His small hands trembled slightly as he opened the locket and removed the tiny key he had guarded so carefully. For weeks, Isabella stood beside her friend, offering the silent support that had become her trademark. Beatrice watched the scene with a heavy heart, knowing that these two brave children were about to uncover secrets that could change their lives forever. Arthur went to the painting depicting the first Blackwood family pharmacy and carefully removed it from the wall, revealing the small built-in safe the children had discovered. The lock was as delicate as the key, and when Raphael inserted it, the mechanism responded with an almost inaudible click. Inside the safe, there was a surprising amount of documents, photographs, USB drives, and small recording devices. Arthur carefully removed everything and spread the contents on his desk, like a detective organizing evidence from a complex case. "Beatrice," he said in a choked voice, "what you're about to see will confirm all our worst suspicions about Carla, but it will also show that she is part of something much bigger than we imagined." The first thing that caught their attention was a detailed photographic dossier on Arthur's life that dated back more than 3 years before he officially met Carla. There were photos of him leaving the company, frequenting restaurants, attending social events, always accompanied by handwritten notes that analyzed his routine, habits, and vulnerabilities. "My God," Beatrice whispered. "She was investigating you for years." "It gets worse," Arthur said with bitterness in his voice. The following documents revealed the true extent of the conspiracy. Carmen Rodriguez Vega had not just changed her identity to get close to Arthur. She was part of an organized group of former Hemisphere Laboratories employees who had been fired for industrial espionage and had been plotting for years to destroy the Blackwood company from within. The plan was complex and well-structured. Carmen would approach Arthur, marry him, and gradually incapacitate him through medications that would simulate a degenerative neurological disease. Meanwhile, she would assume increasing control of the company, modifying contracts, altering drug formulas, and transferring industrial secrets to the group of ex-employees who were now working for rival international companies. But the most shocking part of the discovery came when they found a document detailing the final phase of the plan. When Arthur was declared completely incapacitated, Carmen would assume legal guardianship of Raphael and force the total transfer of the company's shareholding control to herself. The boy would then be sent to a boarding school abroad, far from any influence that could question the decisions of his adoptive mother. "Daddy," Raphael said in a trembling voice, finally understanding the magnitude of the danger he had been in. "She wanted to send me away forever." Arthur hugged his son tightly, feeling a mixture of anger and relief for having discovered the plan before it was too late. "Yes, my son, but thanks to Isabella and Beatrice, we found out everything in time." Beatrice continued to examine the documents and found something that disturbed her even more: detailed medical reports on the effects of the medications Carmen had been administering to Arthur. They were not just substances that caused mental confusion, but drugs that, in cumulative doses, could cause permanent damage to the nervous system and even be fatal in the long run. "Mr. Blackwood," she said in a choked voice, "these reports show that Mrs. Carmen wasn't just trying to temporarily incapacitate you. She was trying to—" "Poison me slowly," Arthur completed, with a calmness that surprised everyone. "Yes, Beatrice, I had already come to that conclusion. That's why I made the decision to stop her medications completely, no matter the consequences." It was then that they found the USB drives with audio recordings. Arthur connected one to his computer and, through headphones, listened to Carmen's phone conversations that had been intercepted by a device he had managed to install on her phone weeks before he began to officially suspect her activities. The recordings were devastating. Carmen spoke openly about the progress of the Blackwood operation, discussed adjustments to the medication dosages based on Arthur's physical resistance, and coordinated with her accomplices the next steps to take full control of the company. In one of the most shocking recordings, she commented on the attempted kidnapping of Raphael, revealing that she herself had provided information about the house's security routine to facilitate the men's action. The goal was not actually to kidnap the boy, but to create a stressful situation that would justify increasing the doses of medication for Arthur, accelerating the incapacitation process. "She was responsible for that terrible night," Beatrice said with growing indignation in her voice. "She put Raphael in danger just to drug you more." "And if it weren't for Isabella's courage," Arthur added, looking at the girl with infinite gratitude, "her plan would have worked perfectly." Isabella, who had remained silent throughout the revelation, finally spoke. "Uncle Arthur, now that we know all this, what are we going to do? Aunt Carmen will realize you're no longer taking her medicine, and she might try something worse." The girl's question touched on the central point of the dilemma they faced. They had more than enough evidence to unmask Carmen and take the entire conspiracy to the authorities, but they were also dealing with a desperate and dangerous person who would not hesitate to take drastic measures if she realized she had been discovered. Arthur took out his phone and showed Beatrice a series of messages he had received during the day from lawyers and company executives, reporting that Carmen had tried to call an emergency meeting of the board of directors for the next day, claiming that his health had deteriorated drastically and that urgent decisions needed to be made about the company's management. "She's accelerating the plan," Arthur said. "She probably realized something has changed and wants to finish everything before I can react." "But now you have the proof," Beatrice reminded him. "Yes, but Carmen is very clever and has powerful allies. If I simply showed up at tomorrow's meeting with this evidence, she could claim it's the fabrications of a sick mind, the result of the neurological disease she's been telling everyone I have." At that moment, Isabella had an idea that surprised everyone with its cunning. "Uncle Arthur," she said with that seriousness that characterized her, "what if we made Aunt Carmen confess herself? If she thinks you're still sick, she might tell the truth if she thinks she has nothing left to hide." Arthur looked at the girl with growing admiration. "Go on, Isabella. What are you thinking?" "You could pretend to be very sick tomorrow morning and ask to speak with her privately. If she thinks you're going to die or be incapacitated forever, maybe she'll tell the truth about everything. And we could record that conversation." Beatrice was worried about her daughter's suggestion. "Isabella, that would be very dangerous. If Carmen realizes it's a trap—" "But, Mum," the girl interrupted, "she has already tried to harm Uncle Arthur for months. If we don't do anything, she'll get what she wants. At least this way we try to catch her telling the truth." Raphael, inspired by his friend's courage, also supported the idea. "Dad, Isabella is right, and if it goes wrong, at least we tried." Arthur was silent for a few minutes, weighing the risks and benefits of the suggestion. Finally, he made his decision. "We'll do it," he said with renewed determination, "but with some modifications. Beatrice, you will hide in the closet adjacent to our bedroom with a recorder. The children will stay with you to ensure they are safe, and I will have an alarm device that I can trigger if the situation becomes dangerous." "Mr. Blackwood," Beatrice said with concern, "are you sure there isn't another way?" "Beatrice, Carmen destroyed my health, threatened my son, and tried to steal everything my family has built for generations. She deserves to be confronted with her own words." As they organized the details of the plan for the next morning, none of them noticed that a shadow had moved quickly down the hallway outside the study. Carmen had woken up for a drink of water and, noticing light coming from the study, had decided to check what was happening. She hadn't been able to hear the full conversation, but she had caught enough fragments to understand that her secret identity had been discovered. She returned to the bedroom with her heart pounding and her mind working frantically. If Arthur had regained his lucidity and discovered her activities, her entire years-long plan was in jeopardy. She needed to act quickly before he could use any evidence against her. She picked up her phone and made an urgent call to her accomplices, speaking in a mix of English and Spanish that revealed her true Argentine origin. I need to accelerate everything. Arthur knows tomorrow has to be the final day. On the other end of the line, the voice replied with professional coolness. Understood, Carmen. The emergency plan is activated. At 6 in the morning, we will be in position. Carmen hung up the phone and watched Arthur sleeping beside her, unaware that he was only pretending to be asleep and had heard every word of the conversation. The approaching dawn would be decisive. On one side, Arthur, Beatrice, and the two brave children who had discovered the truth. On the other, Carmen and her allies, willing to do anything to prevent years of planning from being wasted. The final confrontation was about to begin, and the fate of the Blackwood family would be decided in the next few hours. The evidence was gathered, the plans were made, but the outcome would depend on the courage, intelligence, and determination of a loyal household manager and a 7-year-old girl who had put her life at risk to protect a friend. The morning would arrive in a few hours, bringing with it the resolution of all the mysteries that had plagued the Blackwood family, and finally revealing whether love and loyalty would be stronger than greed and betrayal. The morning dawned grey over London, with heavy clouds that seemed to reflect the tension that had gripped the Blackwood mansion. At 5:30 in the morning, Arthur was already awake, mentally preparing for the confrontation that would define not only his future, but the fate of everyone he loved. Beatrice had positioned Isabella and Raphael in the closet of the master bedroom, with clear instructions to remain absolutely silent no matter what they heard. She herself was hidden in an adjacent area, with an audio recorder and her phone in hand, ready to call the police if anything got out of control. When Carmen awoke, she found Arthur seemingly in a critical state, groaning softly and holding his head as if in intense pain. It was a convincing performance, based on the real symptoms he had experienced during months of gradual poisoning. "Arthur, darling, what's happening?" Carmen asked, approaching the bed with an expression that mixed false concern with poorly disguised satisfaction. "Carla," Arthur murmured in a weak, confused voice, "I feel terrible. Worse than ever. I don't think it will be long now." Carmen sat on the edge of the bed, took her husband's hand, and for the first time in months, Arthur saw a glint of triumph in her eyes that she couldn't completely hide. "Don't say that, love. You just need to take your medicine properly and rest. I'll take care of everything." "Carla," Arthur continued, pretending to be increasingly disoriented, "I'm afraid Raphael will be alone if something happens to me. You will take good care of him, won't you? Protect him as if he were your own son?" The question was the trigger Carmen had been waiting for. Believing that Arthur was genuinely on the brink of a final collapse, she finally let her mask slip. "Arthur," she said in a colder voice, gradually losing the tone of a concerned wife, "you don't need to worry about Raphael. I already have very specific plans for his future." "What kind of plans?" Arthur murmured, keeping his eyes half closed as if struggling to stay conscious. Carmen stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden where she had so often watched the children play. When she spoke again, her voice had a tone of cold satisfaction that made Beatrice's blood run cold. "Raphael is going to a boarding school in Switzerland as soon as you are no longer in a position to make decisions about him. It's for the best, away from the influences here, away from people who might fill his head with inconvenient ideas about inheritance and family responsibilities." Arthur feigned a weak cough. But I wanted him to stay close to the family business." Carmen laughed, a low, cruel sound that revealed years of accumulated resentment. "The Blackwood Company?" she said, turning to look at Arthur with barely disguised contempt. "Arthur, darling, do you really think that after everything that has happened, I would allow this company to remain in the hands of the Blackwood family?" "I don't understand," Arthur whispered, perfectly playing the part of a confused and dying man. "Of course you don't. How could you? For all these months, while you meekly took the medications I specially prepared for you, I have been working to correct an injustice that has lasted far too long." Carmen began to walk around the room, and for the first time since Beatrice had known her, she spoke with what seemed to be her true voice, laced with the Argentine accent she had managed to disguise for so long. "You see, Arthur, my real name is Carmen Rodriguez Vega. I worked for 8 years for Hemisphere Laboratories, developing formulas that your company later copied and marketed as your own innovations. When I tried to prove it, I was fired and slandered in the industry." Arthur groaned softly, as if struggling to process the information, but internally he felt a mixture of shock and validation. His worst suspicions were being confirmed from Carmen's own mouth. "But you got your revenge," he murmured weakly. "Revenge?" Carmen laughed again. "This isn't revenge, Arthur. This is justice. For 3 years I studied you, your routine, your weaknesses. I changed my appearance, created a new identity, and strategically positioned myself so our paths would cross at that pharmaceutical industry event. You fell in love exactly as I had planned." In the closet, Isabella held Raphael's hand tightly, feeling the boy tremble as he listened to the cruel words of the woman who for 2 years had pretended to be his mother. Beatrice, from her hiding place, recorded every word, but her heart also broke to see how Raphael was being affected by these revelations. "And Raphael?" Arthur asked, still maintaining his weak tone. "Raphael is just an inconvenient detail," Carmen said with a coldness that shocked even Arthur, who had been expecting the worst. "An heir who needs to be removed from the equation so I can assume full control of the company's assets. The boarding school is just the most civilized solution. You never cared about him." "Cared?" Carmen stopped walking and looked directly at Arthur. "Arthur, I married you to destroy everything you love. The company, your fortune, your influence in the pharmaceutical sector. Raphael is just a part of what you love and what needs to be removed." At that moment, Arthur had to make a superhuman effort not to break character and confront Carmen immediately. Knowing that she had spent 2 years living in the same house as Raphael, feigning maternal affection while planning to separate him from his family forever, was more painful than he had imagined. "And how did you manage to make me so ill?" he asked, keeping his voice trembling. Carmen smiled with professional pride. "Experimental drugs that my old company had developed for treating neurological disorders, but which were abandoned because they caused exactly the effects I needed: progressive mental confusion, deterioration of motor coordination, and in cumulative doses. Well, let's just say they would eventually cause irreversible heart problems." Arthur felt a chill run down his spine. Carmen wasn't just trying to incapacitate him, she was literally trying to kill him slowly. "But why did it take so long?" he asked, feigning confused curiosity. "Because it needed to look natural," Carmen explained with clinical coldness. "A gradual degenerative disease, which would justify my progressive assumption of control of the company. If you died, or became incapacitated too quickly, it could raise suspicions. It was then that they heard the sound of vehicles arriving at the property's entrance." Carmen looked out the window and smiled. "Ah, they've arrived right on time," she said, and for the first time Arthur detected nervousness in her voice. "Who has arrived?" he asked, though he already suspected the answer. "My associates," Carmen said, no longer able to maintain her facade completely. "People who helped me plan all this, and who will ensure that nothing interferes with the final plans." Arthur realized the situation was spiraling out of control. The original plan was to make Carmen confess, but she had called for reinforcements that could put everyone in real danger. Discreetly, he activated the alarm device he had arranged with Beatrice. It was a small remote control that made a red light flash in her hiding place, signaling that she should call the police immediately. Beatrice saw the signal and, with trembling hands, dialed the emergency number. She whispered to the operator that there was a kidnapping situation in progress at the Blackwood mansion, provided the address, and asked them to send units immediately. Meanwhile, Carmen had left the room to receive her accomplices, leaving Arthur alone. He took the opportunity to whisper towards the closet. "Raphael, Isabella, you heard everything. Now you know that Aunt Carla was never who she said she was, and that you never did anything wrong. Whatever happens from now on, remember that you are brave and special children." Raphael came out of the closet with tears in his eyes, followed by Isabella, who immediately hugged him protectively. "Daddy," Raphael said in a choked voice, "was she going to send me away forever?" "She was going to try, my son, but we're not going to let that happen. Beatrice also emerged from her hiding place, recorder in hand. "Mr. Blackwood, I recorded everything, and I've already called the police." At that moment, they heard footsteps coming up the stairs. Carmen was returning, likely accompanied by the men who had arrived. Arthur made a quick decision. "Beatrice, take the children to Raphael's room and lock the door. Use the secret passage Isabella discovered if you have to. I'm going to confront her now that we have the evidence." "Mr. Blackwood," Beatrice said with concern, "it's too dangerous." "Beatrice," he looked into her eyes with infinite gratitude, "you and Isabella saved my life and Raphael's. Now trust me." When Carmen entered the room, accompanied by two men Arthur recognized as the same ones from the kidnapping attempt, she found Arthur sitting up in bed, his expression no longer one of confusion, but of clear, lucid determination. "Hello, Carmen Rodriguez Vega," he said in a firm voice. "Or do you prefer I continue to call you Carla?" Carmen's expression changed instantly. The mask of the concerned wife vanished completely, revealing the calculating coldness she had hidden for so long. "So you know," she said simply. "I know everything. About your real identity, about the drugs, about your plan for Raphael, and about your accomplices here who tried to kidnap my son." Carmen crossed her arms, and for the first time since Arthur had known her, he saw the real woman behind the performance. "And what do you think you can do with that information, Arthur? You're alone, weakened by months of medication, and I have very competent people who will ensure you don't cause any trouble." "I'm not alone," Arthur said calmly, "and you've just confessed all your crimes to a recorder. Besides, the police should be on their way." Carmen's face paled. She turned to the two men and spoke rapidly in Spanish. But before they could react, the sound of police sirens began to echo in the distance, rapidly approaching the mansion. "You can't prove anything," Carmen said desperately. "They're just recordings that could have been fabricated by a sick mind." "Carmen," Arthur said, getting out of bed with more strength than he had shown in months, "I have the medications you gave me, laboratory analyses of the components, recordings of your intercepted phone calls, documents about your true identity, and now the recording of your full confession. But more important than all that, I have the loyalty of people who truly care about me." At that moment the door opened, and Beatrice entered carrying a folder with all the evidence they had gathered from the secret safe. Behind her came Raphael and Isabella, hand in hand, showing the courage that had characterized their entire journey. "Mummy Carla," Raphael said in a firm voice despite his tears, "I know you were never my real mummy, but I have a real family. My daddy, Beatrice and Isabella, and they would never abandon me." Carmen looked at the children, and for the first time, Arthur saw something that might have been remorse flash across her eyes. But as the sirens grew louder, indicating the police had arrived at the property, she tried one last desperate gamble. "You don't understand," she said, addressing her accomplices. "We can't let them talk to the police." But the two men, realizing the operation had failed completely and that they were surrounded by police, decided to surrender without resistance. They were professional criminals, but not violent, and they knew that trying anything against children in the presence of the police would only worsen their legal situation. When the police officers entered the mansion, they found Carmen desperately trying to destroy some documents, while Arthur, Beatrice, and the children waited for them calmly in the living room, with all the evidence organized and ready to be presented. The detective inspector in charge of the case, Frank Mason, listened attentively to the full account of events, examined the physical evidence, and heard the recordings that proved not only the attempted poisoning and the corporate conspiracy, but also the planning of Raphael's kidnapping. Carmen Rodriguez Vega was arrested on the spot, along with her two accomplices, facing charges that included attempted murder, conspiracy, identity fraud, attempted kidnapping, and industrial espionage. The evidence was so conclusive that not even the best lawyer would be able to question her guilt. As Carmen was led away by the police, she looked one last time at Raphael and said something that surprised everyone. I hope you'll be happier than I was." They were the first genuine words she had spoken in 2 years of living with them, revealing that perhaps, deep in her soul wounded by professional injustice, a small spark of humanity still remained. When the house finally returned to silence, it was already midday. Arthur, Beatrice, Raphael, and Isabella sat in the living room, physically and emotionally exhausted, but also relieved in a way that was beyond words. "Daddy," Raphael said, snuggling into his father's lap, "is everything going to be okay now?" "Yes, my son," Arthur replied, hugging him tightly and looking at Beatrice and Isabella with infinite gratitude. "Now our family can be truly happy. The battle was over. Truth had conquered lies, loyalty had overcome betrayal, and genuine love had triumphed over manipulation. But most importantly, two brave children and a dedicated mother had proven that no matter how powerful the enemies, when people unite for truth and love, they can overcome any adversity. The nightmare was over, but the true journey of healing and rebuilding for the Blackwood family was just beginning. 6 months had passed since that decisive morning that had forever changed the destiny of the Blackwood family. The Kensington mansion now breathed a true tranquility, a stark contrast to the tense silence that had characterized it during the dark period of Carmen's presence. Arthur had fully recovered from the effects of the medications Carmen had administered to him for so long. The doctors were impressed with his ability to regenerate, and Dr. Henry Campbell, who had cared for the entire family for years, commented that he had never seen anyone recover so well from such slow and systematic poisoning. But Arthur knew his healing was not just physical. It was also emotional and spiritual, fueled by the genuine love that now flowed freely in his home. Beatrice had been officially promoted to general manager of the house and Arthur's personal assistant, with a salary that guaranteed her complete financial security. More importantly, she had truly become part of the Blackwood family, not as an employee, but as the sister Arthur never had, and the mother figure Raphael so desperately needed after discovering Carmen had never felt genuine affection for him. Isabella, now 8 years old, had blossomed in a way that surprised everyone who knew her. She was enrolled in the same private school as Raphael, where she excelled not only in her studies, but also in the natural leadership she showed among her peers. It was as if the experience of protecting Raphael and helping to unmask Carmen had awakened in her a confidence and wisdom far beyond her years. Raphael, for his part, had transformed from a shy and insecure boy into a confident and cheerful young man. The discovery that Carmen had never truly loved him was initially devastating, but with the support of Beatrice, Isabella, and his father, he learned to value the genuine relationships that surrounded him. His friendship with Isabella had grown even stronger, becoming a partnership that Arthur knew would last a lifetime. The trial of Carmen Rodriguez Vega had become a landmark case in the British business world. The evidence presented by Arthur was so conclusive that she ended up confessing to all her crimes in exchange for a reduced sentence. She was sentenced to 12 years in prison for attempted murder, conspiracy, identity fraud, and industrial espionage. Her accomplices received shorter sentences, but would also face years behind bars. During the trial, something unexpected happened. Carmen asked to speak personally with Raphael in a session supervised by the judge and lawyers. In that meeting, she offered a sincere apology to the boy, explaining that her quest for revenge against the Blackwood Company had consumed her humanity, causing her to lose sight of the fact that Raphael was just an innocent child who deserved love and protection, not manipulation and abandonment. "Raphael," she had said with tears in her eyes, "I know you can never forgive me, and I'm not asking you to. I just want you to know that in the end you taught me that there were more important things than revenge. Your father is a lucky man to have a son like you." Raphael, showing a maturity impressive for his 8 years, replied, "I hope one day you find people who really care about you like I have." That conversation marked the definitive end of the Carmen chapter in the Blackwoods' lives, but it also showed that even in the most painful situations, there was room for redemption and human growth. The Blackwood Pharmaceutical Company not only recovered from the damage caused by Carmen's sabotage, but grew significantly. Arthur, with his clear mind and renewed energy, implemented new security protocols and developed international partnerships that strengthened the company's position in the market. More importantly, he established a scholarship program for employees' children, inspired by the courage and intelligence Isabella had shown. It was on a Sunday afternoon, exactly 1 year after the stormy night that had changed their lives, that Arthur gathered his family in the mansion's garden for a special conversation. Beatrice was helping Raphael and Isabella with a school project on British history when Arthur approached carrying a folder of documents. "Family," he said, a word he now pronounced with special affection. "It's time to make official something that has existed in our hearts for a long time." Arthur opened the folder and showed them adoption papers he had prepared with his lawyers. He wanted to officially adopt Isabella as his daughter, giving her all the rights and privileges of an heir to the Blackwood family, including a stake in the company when she came of age. Beatrice was speechless, tears streaming down her face. Isabella, always perceptive, immediately understood the meaning of those papers. "Uncle Arthur," she said with her characteristic seriousness, "does this mean I'm going to be Raphael's real sister?" "It means you've always been my sister," Raphael replied, hugging his friend tightly. "Now it's just written on paper." "Beatrice," Arthur said, turning to the woman who had become so much more than a household manager, "you saved my life and Raphael's. Isabella saved all of us with her courage. You are my family, and I want the whole world to know it." The adoption ceremony took place 2 weeks later, on a sunny morning at the registry office with the presence of company employees who had become close family friends. Dr. Henry Campbell served as a witness, commenting that in 40 years of medicine, he had never seen a family come together in such a special way. After the adoption was official, Arthur made another announcement that surprised everyone. He had decided to create a foundation in the name of Isabella Blackwood Shaw, dedicated to protecting children in vulnerable situations and promoting quality education for the children of working families. "Isabella," he explained during the celebratory dinner, "your courage in protecting Raphael was not just an act of friendship, it was an example of how small acts of love can transform entire lives. This foundation will ensure that other children have the opportunities you deserve." Isabella, now officially Isabella Blackwood Shaw, listened to her adoptive father's words seriously, but also with a smile that lit up the entire room. "Daddy Arthur," she said, using for the first time the term she had hesitated to say for months, "I promise I will use these opportunities to help other children too." Raphael approached his sister and held her hand. "We'll help together. We're a team, remember?" Beatrice watched the scene with a heart overflowing with gratitude. Her daughter, who a year ago had played discreetly in the mansion's corridors as the cleaner's child, was now officially an heiress of one of London's most respected families. But more importantly, she was loved, protected, and had a bright future ahead of her. In the months that followed, the Blackwood family developed their own traditions that reflected their unique formation. Every Friday, they had a special dinner where each person shared the best and worst parts of their week. Arthur had established a rule. Any problem, no matter how small, had to be shared with the family. Nothing would ever be kept secret or faced alone again. Isabella and Raphael grew up together, developing a bond that impressed teachers and friends. At school, they were known for defending children who were bullied and for leading charity projects that involved the entire student community. Their experience of overcoming such a dangerous situation together had created a mutual trust between them that made them practically inseparable. Arthur, renewed physically and emotionally, became an even more respected businessman, but he was now also known for his leadership philosophy based on transparency and genuine care for employees and partners. In lectures he gave on business management, he always told the story of how a 7-year-old girl had taught him that true strength comes from the courage to protect those we love. Beatrice developed administrative skills that surprised even Arthur. She enrolled in a business administration course and discovered a natural talent for management and leadership. Arthur began to consult her on important company decisions, valuing her insight and her ability to notice details that other executives missed. On the 2nd anniversary of the night that had changed their lives, the Blackwood family threw a special party. They invited all the company employees, the children's teachers, Dr. Henry Campbell, and even Detective Inspector Frank Mason, who had become a family friend after handling the case with such professionalism and sensitivity. During the party, Arthur gave a speech that moved everyone. 2 years ago, I thought I knew the meaning of family. I thought family was about blood, name, tradition. But a stormy night and the courage of 2 extraordinary people taught me that family is so much more than that. Family is who stands by your side when all seems lost. Family is who risks their own safety to protect the ones they love. Family is who sees through the lies and fights for the truth. He paused, looking at Beatrice, Isabella, and Raphael with infinite love. Beatrice and Isabella didn't just save our company or our fortune. They saved our souls. They proved that true love is stronger than any conspiracy, that genuine loyalty surpasses any betrayal, and that when people unite for the truth, no force in the world can defeat them. Isabella, now almost 10 and showing a natural eloquence, asked to speak as well. Mummy Beatrice always taught me that we should protect those we love. When I saw that Raphael was in danger, I didn't think about being brave or heroic. I just thought he was my friend and I couldn't let anything bad happen to him. Today, he is my real brother, and Daddy Arthur is my real father, and our family is proof that the best families are the ones we choose to form with love. Raphael, not wanting to be left behind, also expressed his feelings. I learned that sometimes people who say they love us might be lying, but other times, people we barely know can love us for real. From the very first moment, Isabella protected me when she didn't even really know who I was. Beatrice took care of me as if I were her own son, and Dad taught me that being strong isn't about never being afraid, but about doing the right thing, even when we are scared. The party went on late into the night, with music, dancing, and many shared stories. When everyone had finally gone home and the family gathered in the living room, there was a serenity in the air that contrasted deeply with the tension that had characterized the house during May, the dark period of Carmen's presence. "You know," Arthur said as he watched Isabella and Raphael playing quietly on the rug, "I sometimes think that Carmen, without knowing it, did us a favor. If it weren't for her, I would never have truly known you. I would never have learned to value what really matters." "Mr. Blackwood," said Beatrice, who still occasionally used the formal address in moments of high emotion, "I believe everything happened as it was meant to. My daughter was born to be your daughter, Raphael was born to be her brother, and I was born to take care of this family." That night, when they put the children to bed, Isabella asked a question that deeply touched Arthur's heart. "Daddy, do you think that if I hadn't hidden Raphael that night, our family would have still formed?" Arthur thought carefully before answering. "Isabella, I believe that the best things in life happen when we show ourselves willing to protect and love one another. You and your mother have always had that inside you. Raphael and I were the ones who needed to learn. Perhaps our family would have formed in another way, but it was your courage that made it possible for us to truly know each other. So it was a good thing it happened?" "It was the best thing that ever happened in my life," Arthur replied, kissing his adopted daughter's forehead. 2 years passed quickly. Isabella, now 12, had become a bright and confident young woman, a student leader at her school, and the creator of several social projects that helped underprivileged children in the area. Raphael, at 10, had developed a passion for science and dreamed of one day working in the family business, not as a mandatory heir, but as someone who genuinely wanted to contribute to improving people's lives through medicine. Arthur, at 58, felt younger and more energetic than he had in the previous decade. The Blackwood Company had become a benchmark, not only in pharmaceutical innovation, but also in corporate social responsibility. The Isabella Blackwood Shaw Foundation had already benefited hundreds of children with scholarships and development programs. Beatrice had graduated with honors in administration and had officially become a minority partner in the Blackwood Company, a recognition of her fundamental contribution both to saving the family and to the administrative restructuring that followed. She was respected in the business world as a brilliant executive who had risen through merit, hard work, and exemplary loyalty. On a Saturday morning, as the family had breakfast in the mansion's garden, a tradition they had developed to spend time together, Raphael made an observation that perfectly summed up the journey they had all taken. "You know, Dad, sometimes I think about what our life would be like if that night had never happened. And I realized that maybe I would never have truly known who you were. Isabella would never have become my sister, and Beatrice would never have become our real family. And do you miss how it was before? Asked Isabella, always curious about her brother's feelings. No, Raphael answered without hesitation, because now I know what it means to have a real family. Before, I had a beautiful house and a lot of things, but I didn't have what I have now, people who truly love me and whom I truly love too. Arthur watched his children, for that is how he thought of them now, as his children in the fullest sense of the word, and felt a deep gratitude for all the winding paths that had led to the formation of this unique and special family. Children, he said, you have taught me that life sometimes presents us with very difficult situations, but when we face those situations with courage, love, and unity, we always come out stronger than we went in. And happier too, added Isabella, smiling at her brother. Much happier, confirmed Raphael. Beatrice, watching the conversation in silence, felt her chest overflow with emotion. Her daughter, who had started this journey as a shy child playing discreetly in the mansion's corridors, was now a confident and beloved young woman, the official daughter of one of the country's most respected families, with a bright future guaranteed not by charity, but by genuine love and recognition of her value as a person. And she herself had transformed from a desperate widow in search of work into a respected executive and an integral member of a family that truly loved her. It was a transformation that went far beyond the financial or social aspect. It was a transformation of the heart, of the soul, of her very identity. When breakfast ended and the children ran off to play in the pool, Arthur and Beatrice remained talking on the veranda watching. Raphael and Isabella laugh and have fun with the natural carelessness of childhood. Beatrice, Arthur said, you know I'll never be able to adequately thank you for what you and Isabella did for our family, don't you? Mr. Blackwood, she replied, then corrected herself with a smile. Arthur, we did what any family would do. We protected each other, we loved each other, and we fought for the truth together. Yes, he agreed. That's exactly what a family does. They sat in silence for a few minutes, watching the children and reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had led them to this moment of peace and happiness. You know, Arthur said finally, I used to think that building a successful company was my greatest achievement in life, but now I realize that my greatest achievement was learning the true meaning of family through you. And my greatest achievement, replied Beatrice, was raising a daughter brave enough to protect the one she loves, and finding a family that loved us from the very first moment they met us. As they watched Raphael teach Isabella a new swimming style, they both knew that this family, forged in adversity and built on foundations of genuine love, courage, and mutual loyalty, was something that would last forever. The challenges they faced together had made them stronger. The love they discovered for each other had healed wounds that seemed impossible to mend. And the courage they showed in critical moments had proven that when people unite for truth and love, there is no force in the world that can defeat them. The Blackwood family had found their happy ending, but it was more than that. They had found a new beginning, a future built on solid foundations of true love, mutual trust, and an unwavering commitment to protect and care for one another, no matter what storms fate might still bring.